I'd like to talk about another poem. This time it's John Donne's The Good Morrow, which for my money is the equal in skill to anything, and beauty as well, to anything that Shakespeare wrote, if not the equal in volume and variety. And perhaps I could introduce it by referring to a video that was done by my pal Janice Fiamengo, who is a men's rights activist and anti-feminist in Canada. She was the professor of literature at Ottawa University, and her video takes on and refutes the mean feminist idea that English love poetry is anti-women because it objectifies women. And I think that the reason I think this poem is so appropriate for that is twofold. Firstly, I think that this poem, what's ironic, or what I think feminists ought to find ironic, is that the love that John Donne is expressing is one of sublime equality, the sublime equality of oneness. And I do think that sublime is the right word here. And secondly, because it is such a good poem, I think it outweighs the entire canon of written feminist spite from Mary Wollstonecraft afterwards. But perhaps I should be even-handed and say maybe I think this should be an antidote and perhaps a rebuke to many of the people in the manosphere, not the men's rights activists who I think often talk a whole lot of sense, but the revolting manosphere and their insistence on the loveless, revolting concepts like sexual market value, body count, or marks out of 10. I hope that John Donne's clear-eyed, realistic and unflinching view of love and the sublime nature of his love is an antidote to both camps. We, in a managed society like ours, things that tend to get promoted are things that can be measured and controlled. Love can't be, sex can. And that's why we find it today very easy to talk about sex and very difficult to talk about love. But English poetry, one of the features is that it is really good at saying the unsayable, at speaking the unspeakable. So let me go to the poem itself. And I just deal with the three features that I think pervade English poetry. Again, firstly, I've dealt with them before, I think. Firstly, its ability to say the unsayable. Secondly, that it has it tends to have a very clear-eyed and tough realism which undergirds and underpins the simple lyric grace, often a very simple monosyllabic lyric grace, which is rendered more convincing and firmer made more durable by the realism that underpins it. And thirdly, that English poetry has a tendency, good English poetry has a tendency to unlock life mysteries, our psychology and the way we interact with each other and with the world. So perhaps I'd like to read the poem. I guess it's a waste of time, but I want to do it, so I'll do it. I'll read it now. Okay. The Good Morrow by John Donne. I wonder by my troth what thou and I did till we loved. Were we not weaned till then, but sucked on country pleasures childishly, or snorted we in the seven sleepers' den? 'Twas so, but this all pleasure's fancies be. If ever any beauty I did see which I desired and got, 'twas but a dream of thee. And now good morrow to our waking souls, which watch not one another out of fear, for love, all love of other sights controls, and makes one little room and everywhere. Let sea discover us to new worlds have gone, let maps to others worlds on worlds have shown. Let us possess one world, each hath one and is one. My face in thine eye, thine in mine appears, and true plain hearts do in the faces rest. Where can we find two better hemispheres, without sharp north, without declining west? Whatever dies was not mixed equally. If our two loves be one, or thou and I love so alike that none do slacken, none can die. So it's beautiful. You can tell it's beautiful just by hearing it, and you can tell it's skilled and quality as well. This poem is divided up into 3 verses, 3 stanzas. The first one sets out the history, where we were up to now, how we got here. And the second one, that sets the scene, where the 2 lovers are today. And the third one, that's the peroration, the culmination of the poem. That's where he packs the punch. I'd like to go through it line by line. And the poem tends to read in pairs of lines. So that's the way I'll tend to do it. Now it begins in a casual, oblique way, not in a sublime way at all. He is deliberately avoiding that. I wonder by my troth what thou and I did till we loved. So I wonder. He's not making great declarations. He's just saying, I wonder what we did till we loved. Were we not weaned till then? And the word there that stands out is that word did. It's outside the meter, it's outside the rhythm. So instead of going da-da, da-da, it goes da-da. So did till we loved. And it's deliberately crude, gross, a bit vulgar, the kind of sexual reference or hints of about crude sexuality. So what did we do? It's a kind of external, lumpy nature of reality that they chased after before they knew each other. Were we not weaned till then? So were we just babies, infants who weren't able to eat meat? And then, but sucked on country pleasures childishly, or snorted we in the 7 sleepers' den. Now that line, but sucked on country pleasures childishly, he is there obliterating any sense of the sentimental. He's being very crude and shocking. He's setting out to shock, partly because I think he enjoys it, but partly also to show we were not sublime then. There was nothing sublime about us beforehand. Now, but sucked on country pleasures, this poem was written around 1592, so about 430 years ago. In those days, the soft S was often tended to be printed as an F. So, sucked, you can imagine what that read. Sucked with an F, okay? And country pleasures, that refers to a woman's genitals, a woman's private parts. So Hamlet, he talks about country matters, and Iago in Othello talks about country parts. So we sucked on country pleasures. You don't have to be a genius to guess what 4-letter word came out of the phrase country pleasures. Okay, so country pleasures childishly. That line is as shocking, or more shocking even, today than it would have been in the late 1500s, in the mid-Elizabethan age. But so what he's saying is we fornicated around, we sucked with an F, we fornicated around with women's private parts the way children do. Think about that. Think how shocking that line is. He is trying to shock. He's trying to say we were not holy people then. Or snorted we in the 7 sleepers' den. 'Twas so, but this all pleasures fancies be. Now, the 7 sleepers, that's a medieval legend about some Christians who were getting persecuted under the Romans, I think it was 250 AD, and so that they went into a cave and fell asleep for 200 years until the storm of persecution had passed, and then they woke up after 200 years. Critics say, and I think they're right, that this is also a reference to Plato's allegory of the cave. So those 2 lines together refer to that. Plato's allegory of the cave, that refers to what Plato says is that we are like prisoners in a cave. We're shackled to the cave, facing the back wall of the cave, and behind us there's a fire, and every so often people walk in front of the fire, so between the fire and us, and they might carry objects or they might show themselves, and that projects shadows onto the back wall of the cave, so that all we see as we're shackled there is, so if they walk in front of the fire holding a vase, we see a vase projected against the far wall of the cave, and we think, that's a vase, or someone walks by, we think, that's a person, but we're not seeing reality directly, we're just seeing shadows of reality, shadows of the world, as Tennyson put it. So and what Plato says is that one day a genius philosopher, perhaps like Plato, will come and grab us kicking and screaming, drag us out of the cave into the painful bright sunlight, where we will perceive reality directly and be really glad we do, and we'll be overwhelmed by the direct perception of reality. And until that stage, we will just see shadows, which will be pleasures, fancies. Any pleasures will be pleasures, fancies, i.e. the fantasy, some kind of imaginary reflection of pleasure. So this all pleasures, fancies be. That's what he's saying. That is a reference to the allegory of the cave, and that's important because Donne returns later in the third stanza to that idea of the perception of reality in a really remarkable way. Very, very skilled, very perceptive. I don't know how he had the genius to do it, but he does. And what he's doing here is setting us up for the culmination of the poem, all right, by referring to Plato's idea of reality and the perception of reality. I can't stress that enough in this poem. That's the main theme of this poem. You could almost say, although this is a love poem, you could say that it's more a psycho-spiritual poem than a love poem. The traditional romance poem, the medieval romance poem, would be about a lowly knight who is besotted with an aristocratic lady who is already married to an aristocrat, so the relationship is adulterous, and it can also never be consummated, so his way of consummating it is to go out and to perform impossible knightly deeds which he dedicates to her. And in the Elizabethan age, that gradually became adapted to the lover who feels overwhelmed by the beauty of the lady that he is impossibly dedicated to, and so he would write poems describing how he is conquered by the curve of her eyebrow, or the straight line of her nose, or the fact that her eyes are like the sun. And Shakespeare mocked this. That became a kind of a stereotype of in Elizabethan literature, and that eventually got translated into adapted into the seduction poem, where the would-be lover heaps this praise on a woman in hopes that she'll sleep with him. Okay, but none of that, this poem is not that. None of that is happening in this poem. They've already spent the night together. They're waking up afterwards. They've already had sex. This is not a poem of seduction. It's not really a poem of romance, certainly not in the classical sense. It's really a poem of how their love has caused them to awaken to the real nature of reality. So, if ever any beauty I did see, which I desired and got, 'twas but a dream of thee. Now, again, what I suspect he may be doing, I can't prove it, but I think he's engaging in wordplay there with the F and the S. So I would read that as saying, if ever any beauty I did fee. To fee means to pay someone for professional services. I think that's a reference to prostitution. Again, I think he's trying to shock. He's trying to say, I was not a holy individual. I was quite gross and crude. We both were, until we woke up, until the good morrow came, until our love awakened us. And critics, I've read a couple of critics who say, isn't John Donne unpleasant? What he's saying is, if ever I saw anyone beautiful, I slept with her, and she was nothing compared to you. No, this is not conceit. This is not John Donne being conceited. This is John Donne being modest, being realistic, saying, I wasn't a very special guy. I was quite crude, gross and vulgar. But all those things that I engaged in then, those pleasures I engaged in, they were a dream of you. That is what he's saying to his fiancée. Okay, now that's the first poem. Those last few words, they lead in to, that's the first stanza. The last few words of that line lead into the second stanza, which is setting the scene. So, previously he only enjoyed a dream of his mistress, and now good morrow to our waking souls. So it's not just that they're waking up, but they're not just waking up physically, it's their souls, their hearts and minds that are waking up, and which watch not one another out of fear, for love or all love of other sights controls. Now, again, what he's saying is that they don't watch, their fears, their negative emotions have been tamed by their love, and the fact that they have awoken and are able to see clearly. That they have control of their emotions and control of their desire, for love, all love of other sights controls. And I think he's also hinting that their love clarifies their vision, gives them a clearer view of reality. It controls their love of other sights. And I think that interpretation is enhanced by the next line, and makes one little room and everywhere. If you're lucky, you'd have had that experience where you wake up with someone you love in a room and you think, I'm not interested in the outside world, I'm just interested in this room and what's in this room. That's an emotional state. But I think he's going further than that. It's not just that they feel it's that way, it's that it becomes that way. And I think he's talking about union. This is the beginning of his talk of oneness. And this is where I refer to the sublime, i.e. the direct perception of ultimate reality. It's not just that the room feels like all they want, but that room has become synonymous or one with everything. Along the lines of seeing the world in a grain of sand. Let sea discoverers to new worlds have gone, let maps to others worlds on worlds have shown. And what he's saying there is that there is no shortage, there is an infinite outside world that people that heroic figures like sea discoverers can go to. He's not disrespecting them. I think he's saying that they haven't awakened like he and his fiancée have, but they are there is no limit to where they can go, that they are concerned with the outside world, they're concerned with externality, and so that they're going to new worlds, they're creating maps, they're depicting other worlds in addition to the new worlds that they've discovered. I think that worlds on worlds, that may refer, I suspect that refers to planetary maps of the galaxy, which had been produced post-Copernicus. So he's saying we can sea discoverers can discover other continents, and astronomers can discover other worlds, other planets, worlds on worlds. It's just infinite. You can pursue external reality infinitely. I think is what he's saying. But for them, let us possess one world. Each hath one and is one. Okay, that is the repetition of the word one. Let us possess one world. Each hath one and is one. He's emphasizing that the oneness that they perceive as a result of having awakened, that they don't need to go discovering new worlds. They realize that their world is one, and there is a kind of a non-duality, a non-separateness between them, that they each own a world, but they also are. So the one who owns it and the owner and the thing that is owned, that they are one. And so their world, the world that they have, is equal to all these worlds that sea discoverers discover. And again, that last line of that second stanza leads us effortlessly into the third stanza, which is the culmination of the poem. Now, I'll read these first two lines together. I think they're as beautiful as anything anywhere in the whole of English literature. My face in thine eye, thine in mine appears, and true plain hearts do in the faces rest. Now, those two lines, I think, are the key to this poem. I think they unlock this poem. I'll describe what he means. What he's talking about is, it's really a lovely thing. They're in bed, they've woken up, they're gazing at each other, and he sees his face reflected in her eye, and she sees her face reflected in his eye. That was in the day that was referred to as looking babies. It's a lovely image in itself, but I think he's taking it much further than that. What I think he's doing is talking about the perception and understanding of reality, of ultimate reality. And here, if you look at that long arrow I've done there, I think that interpretation is supported by the way he has set us up for that, by referring to Plato's allegory of the cave, and the fact that the pleasures they had before were pleasures fancies, the fantasy of pleasure, and now they have the direct perception of reality. And I want to focus on this in a little bit of detail because I think it merits it. I think it's worth it. What he's talking about is the union, the oneness between the perceiver and the perceived. So the eye also contains the face. So the eye is the thing that perceives. The thing that it is perceiving is the face of the other person. And they are one. So the eye and the face, they are... The eye doesn't just see the face, the eye contains the face that it's looking at. So he's talking about they are non-separate, non-dual. That would be the Buddhist word for it. And he goes further in the next line. This line again, I've read a couple of critics who say that the next line is just pretty filler. It sounds nice. True plain hearts doing the face's rest. John Donne didn't do pretty filler. Every word tells in his poetry, and that's the case here. He's going further. What he's talking about is the oneness and union between the perceiver, the perceived, and the perception, i.e. what you feel about it. So you have true plain hearts rest in the face, and the face rests in the eye. So the perceiver, the perceived, and your emotions about what you perceive, they are all one. Okay, and that is the result of their having been awakened by their love on this in the Good Morrow. And I particularly enjoy the beautiful way that meaning is supported by the language, the language that he uses, particularly assonance. Assonance in general today we say that assonance is where a vowel sound is repeated, alliteration is where a consonant gets repeated. So how now brown cow, that's assonance. She sells seashells, that's alliteration. And this is assonance. My face in thine eye, thine in mine. So that I sound 5 times in that one line. Beautiful, simple language. All monosyllabic apart from the word appears. And I get the impression here of reeds just swaying in a stream, or ears of barley just rippling together in unison under a breeze. That's the impression that language gives you, and it supports the meaning, the sort of oneness. These things, the perceiver and the perceived, and your feelings about them, these things might be different things, but they are non-separate. They are in union. They are one. And that, I think, is the meaning of this poem. And that's why I say you could see it as a psycho-spiritual poem. And I don't know how John Donne had the ability to do this. This is squarely in line with the Tibetan Buddhist view of reality, the idea of non-duality, the idea of union between an interdependence between the perceiver and the perceived, which is also being gradually more and more confirmed after a century of quantum physics. Only John Donne didn't have the benefit of a century of quantum physics. He wrote this poem about 3.5 centuries before quantum physics started. He didn't have the benefit of Tibetan Buddhism. He wouldn't have known when the first expedition to Tibet came about 3 centuries after this poem. So I can't explain how John Donne is able to see with such clarity and has such, I think genius is the right word. The only way that I can explain this is that there are some eras where genius is expected. It is the default. So maybe Renaissance Italy for the visual arts, or Belle Epoque France for the visual arts, or Mozart's Vienna, or Baroque Germany for music, or Victorian London for prose, or Elizabethan England for poetry. I think genius was probably expected, and people came up with the goods. I don't know how else to explain it. But this is genius. Okay, on to the next line. Where can we find 2 better hemispheres without sharp north, without declining west? Again, another image of oneness. A hemisphere is a half sphere. They have 2 hemispheres making 1 sphere, which that's the world that each hath and is. So they join together and become one sphere between them. In contrast to the sea discoverers who go and explore the globe and try to discover new worlds. And without sharp north, without declining west, I take that as a reference. Well, sharp north meaning cold north, and declining west, the sun sets in the west. I think he's referring to negative emotions. I think he's saying, because we have awakened and we have this, our love has given us this clear perception, this immediate perception of reality, we have control over negative emotions. We don't experience sharp emotions like anger or desperation, and we don't experience declining emotions like idleness, laziness, or decay. Whatever dies was not mixed equally. If our two loves be one, or thou and I love so alike that none do slacken, none can die. Now that, I think, is a reference to the humours, the medieval doctrine of the humours, where I think there was black bile, yellow bile, blood, and I forget what the fourth humour was. But the idea was that if you mix the humours, if they're mixed equally in you, you enjoy good health and balanced emotions. And alchemy, the idea of transforming base metals into gold, that was based on the theory of the humours. It never worked, but I think that he's referring to both here. He's saying that things die, things decay, because they weren't mixed equally. And if our two loves be one, so if we love as one, if we love not just in a way that we love each other in a unified way, but I think in a metaphysical way. This is genuine. They're rightly called the metaphysicals. If we love each other in a metaphysical way, with an awareness of the oneness of things and of ourselves, or we love each other in a way that's so similar that we don't slacken, that is decay. I think that is a reference to alchemy. Then, like gold, we will not decay, and then we can't die. Then none can die. I don't think he's saying our bodies will never die. I think what he means is our love will transcend death, and it will last forever. I think that's what he's saying. Now, that sentiment there should be a source of shame to any silly, spiteful feminist who has sought to criticise English poetry for talking about what they can't talk about, i.e. love, because it is the equality, as I call it, the sublime equality of oneness, which is what he expresses here. And it's not just a loving oneness, it is a spiritual oneness that has been awakened by their love for each other. So my advice to any fellas out there, memorise this poem. It won't take you very long. You'll actually quite enjoy it. And recite it to your wife or your fiancée. She will thoroughly enjoy it. Even if she doesn't quite understand it, she will know its quality and she will like it. She will associate you with quality for doing so. She should do. And the reason the reason it's such quality, I think, is because, the reason I see it as containing such quality is because it has those three attributes that I outlined at the beginning. Firstly, it says the unsayable. It speaks about love, which we find so hard to talk about today. We love talking about sex, but we find it hard to talk about love. Often it is difficult to talk about love. He does it the way English poets do, in such a determined, explicit, sort of full frontal way, which is what makes English poetry often so comforting, because it takes the things that we can't really talk about and it expresses it for us, but with such skill and clarity. And secondly, it's convincing, it's realistic, it stands up on its own because of this clear-eyed realism, the reasonableness behind the poetic, the lyrical poetic language. And thirdly, because it unlocks one of the mysteries, perhaps the main mystery of life, that this particular poem does, as is characteristic of English poetry. I put it this way: if you want to unlock one of the mysteries of life, you can go to a scientist. I'm not going to disrespect science, and through rigorous research and experimentation, after say a century or so, scientists or a scientist will be able to dismantle that lock and display the parts of that lock to you. Or you can go to a skilled English poet, and he won't dismantle the lock, he will simply unlock that lock and open the door. And I think that is what John Donne does in this poem, and I thoroughly recommend it. Thank you.